Well, this seems like a good opportunity after 3 weeks to do a quick recap on some of the proofs for the existence of God. Now, by proof, we don't mean that there's no room for disagreement, but basically the way I put it is that when you consider these arguments, belief in God is not stupid. So that's the bottom line, and that's important because some accusations against Christians are that they are stupid, and belief in God is stupid, but it's not. So just a quick recap: we have the cosmological argument, which is the same thing as the first cause argument. Whatever begins to exist must have been caused. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe was caused. Now, that's fairly straightforward. The important thing that I want you to remember here is that the cause needs to be personal. That's an important part. Why would we say that the cause is personal? Well, it's personal because of the need to initiate a causal sequence, and only a person, a personal agent, can decide to initiate a causal sequence, one thing happening after another. Somebody's got to push down the first domino, essentially, or hit the cue ball. One of the ways it was stated is that matter cannot decide. So if the universe is only matter and energy, there's nothing to decide to start things off at the beginning. Okay, so keep in mind why the first cause needs to be personal. Secondly is the teleological argument. Now, teleological just means purpose or goal. That's the fine-tuning argument, the design argument. And there are several components of these that were discussed. Initially, what I want you to remember is the physical constants. Students usually get intrigued by what we call the Goldilocks principle, and that is that the Earth is so rare in the universe, and the size of the moon and the distance from the Earth and the able to make an eclipse and all that's all good. Okay, the amount of water on the Earth, yes, but it's vulnerable to the observations that there are trillions of galaxies in the universe, and so it's possible that there are lots and lots of Earth-like planets with these settings and characteristics and so forth. So we should expect to have lots of life. Well, we know that that's not actually the case, empirically proved, but intuitively, it's rather persuasive to a lot of people. What I'd like you to start off with when talking about the teleological argument, the fine-tuning, is the physical constants. Now, this is something that you have to have a little bit of a science intuition about. I mean, here's where science and math actually is important for many reasons. But the physical constants are things like the force of gravity and the expansion rate of the universe, how fast galaxies are retreating from each other, the strong nuclear force, the ratio of the mass of a proton and electron. You are told that there are over at least 30 of these constants, physical constants, that don't need to be exactly what they are. That's the important thing. Remember that illustration of the ruler that stretched across the entire galaxy? Not the galaxy, but the entire universe? The force of gravity didn't need to be exactly what it is, 32 feet per second per second. But because it is, it allows complex life to exist. And all of those 30 exactly the way they are, that's what allows us to have the world that we do. Okay, so the physical constants is an important thing. It's more persuasive than just the rare earth Goldilocks argument, in my opinion. The only way to deal with that, the way they deal with it, is the infinite number of multiverse universes, which of which there is no no evidence for. It's a way of avoiding the implications of the physical constants being so astronomically improbable. Okay? So we got that. We're still on the fine-tuning, the teleological. We got the physical constants, the Goldilocks principle, the irreducible complexity of cellular machines. This irreducible complexity is an important term you should get used to. And not only is it the microscopic nanomachines themselves, like the flagellum or the blood clotting mechanism or things like that, but it's the assembly instructions, how to put those together in the right order. So both of those things are important to remember, are irreducibly complex. And then finally, the information content of DNA is part of this fine-tuning thing also. Remember the illustration that we're not just talking about ink on paper, that if we had some DNA that just happened to be thrown together and have things in a right order, well, that would be like ink on paper. You could study it and see, okay, well, there's something here, some splotches, but being able to decode it, that's information. Information can be decoded and understood, and it's instructions about how to do something. And information always comes from a mind. That's Stephen Meyer's argument. In all of our experience and anything we can conceive of, information only results from mind. So if there is information, the origin is a mind. Okay? Now the third standard argument for the existence of God is the moral argument. This is one that is often misunderstood and confused, because atheists will say, well, I can be good without God. I don't need God to be good, so there's no moral argument. But that's missing the point. The point is that first you have to understand the difference between objective and subjective. Okay, so subjective is an idea or a sense that resides, an opinion that resides in a subject, a person. Objective is a truth or an idea or a character quality that resides outside of a person, in an object, out there. Now, when we're talking about moral laws, people have opinions about what is good and what is bad. That's subjective, my opinion. But if my opinion is actually matching reality with something that is objective out there, then the objective thing must exist on its own. So, example, rape, genocide, racism, torturing babies for fun. These are arguably objectively evil, meaning that the moral quality of badness, evil, resides in the act itself, in the rape itself, in the torturing of the baby for fun itself. That is wrong, regardless of what anybody thinks about it. That's the key point, is that if there is something that is objective, that moral quality resides in the act itself, not in my opinion of it. So the moral argument is essentially, if there is any such, even one objective moral law, that something is objectively good or objectively evil, how do you account for it? And the problem is that moral obligations are held between persons. We're not morally obligated to a rock or the earth or to some abstract principle. a moral obligation is to a person. And if it's an objective obligation that I'm subject to, being subject means to be under. So I'm subject to a transcendent lawgiver. And that's basically the moral argument, is that if there is at least one objective moral law that requires an objective, transcendent, personal moral lawgiver. It's a way of making sense of the moral project. Yes, you can be good without God, without believing in God, but you can't be good and make sense of goodness without a transcendent moral lawgiver who is personal. The retorts, people can disagree about morals, therefore morality is relative to cultures or individuals or governments or whims or something like that. Well, that's claiming that morals are subjective then. But just because we may have a difficulty in discerning what a particular moral rule is doesn't mean that there is no right answer to that. Greg Kokel went into the explanation about, morality is explained by evolution. Our DNA, developed characteristics to pass on moral feelings from one generation to the other so that societies can survive better. Well, maybe that's true. I don't think it is, but even if it is true, DNA can only explain moral feelings, subjective. It can't explain that racism is actually wrong in itself. And if there is any, even one, objective moral rule that is not just a feeling about it, but is actually truly objective and resides in the act itself, then that requires a transcendent, personal, moral lawgiver. So, much more to be said on that, but that's a good summary of what you need to pay attention to regarding those three standard proofs for the existence of God. And remember, by proof, we just mean to say it's reasonable to believe in the Christian God. It's not stupid.